the colors of each letter on the chart, you'll see that the letter Dalet is drawn as a triangle, and it's in the color red. So it's the fourth letter from the right. If it can hold still long enough, it's this letter right here, the red triangle. The fourth letter, Dalet, happens to basically mean a door, and it looks just like a yield sign that you'll see on the highway all the time. And when I first started working on these letters and happened to choose red and the inverted triangle with the point down, you might say, I then noticed it exactly looks like this yield sign. So it's an appropriate thing that it's like, well, yield to the door. Yield to what door? Well, that's what this whole talk is about. Of course, if you know the verse in the Brit Hadashah, the New Testament, where Yeshua said, I am the door, then you could say, well, every time you see this yield sign on the freeway, if you recognize that as being the Dalet and that being the sent one, we should yield to him, yield to his words, yield to the information or the proposition that he came to give us. And so once you associate the pictograms or the icons or the shapes or the what otherwise might be called thematic logograms of each letter, at least for me, every time now I see this yield sign, I'm reminded that I should yield to what was brought to us by the Gimel. And the reason why Yahweh said to wear zitziot threads with the blue thread was that every time we'd see that blue thread, we'd remember, I better keep his instructions. So the purpose of these things is to continually remind ourselves to do what the Creator said to do. And the reason I'm saying all this as an intro to the Dalet is that's at the heart of what this is about. Remembering what he said. So, Jamie happened to mention there about the inverted noons. Now, if you read it as simply history, you say, okay, well, this is just a matter of narrative. This is what happened. The camp of the Israelites would be in a place for a while, and the pillar of fire, pillar of smoke was above the covering of the tent wherein was the Ark of the Covenant in the Mishkan, which is the whole tabernacle setup. And when that pillar of fire and pillar of smoke would get up and move, it would go before them to show them where the next camp was. So they'd scramble to decommission the Mishkan. They'd take it down, and all the Levites had their jobs, and they'd pick up the ark to follow this pillar of fire, pillar of smoke. And when the ark was ready to move, Moshe then stopped and had this, you might say, this formality, which would say, arise, Yahweh, let your enemies be scattered, let those who hate you flee from before your face. Now you might say, as we discussed last week, that might be ceremony. It might be simply, well, this is what they did. It's a matter of historical narrative. And then when the pillar of fire would stop, and then they'd set down the Ark of the Covenant, and then they'd set that down first, and then set the Mishkan up around it, Moshe would have this other ceremonial action where he said, come Yahweh, shuv, or reside, tranquilly amidst the myriad thousands of Israel. Shuvah Yahweh, Ravavot, Alfi Israel, is what he said. And so you think, okay, again, is that a formality? Well, if you look closely at how to translate those words, what I was proposing last week with the Gimel was that everything functions as a boomerang concept. And that these two things Moshe said, which are considered to be the heart or the essence or the center of the entire Torah, which is the foundation of the entire Scripture, which is the basis of everything Yeshua said, which was the thing that every prophet told Israel to go back and regard, which is the thing that then every epistle in the New Testament was encouraging the believers to trust and go back to and found their life on the reality of it, was actually, you might say, the center, the bullseye of what Israel had to expect from their perks, their benefits of the covenant, was in these two verses. It's not just a narrative, but if you don't know how to read it, you read it as simply a narrative, and you've missed the substance, the essence, the reality. It's like, well, what good does it do for me? Well, it's in there. And so here's the concept. Yahweh, all through the scriptures, has said, the way you treat my words is what's going to happen to you. If you regard my words, you get the blessing. And if you disregard my words, you get the curse. Fundamentally, that's what the covenant's all about. And you could say, well, what is the blessing? Well, you could read the Abrahamic covenant, and you could say, oh, well, Abraham and his descendants get the land. And you could read the covenant with Noah and say, well, Yahweh's not going to flood the earth anymore. But in a real practical sense, these two verses are the heart of what the benefit is for getting the covenant, which is to say, the noons are inverted, and they look like brackets, especially the modern noons, which are shaped like a square bracket. And if you turn them upside down or backwards, and you say, well, you write them in paleo, they look like a lightning bolt, and if you flip that around it, maybe it doesn't have the same effect. But to invert something is to turn it upside down and to make it not work, to disarrange it. And it's like, well, what significance is a noon? Was it an arbitrary letter that they put around this? Well, the noon as a prefix means this is what's being imparted to you, and you can literally picture a lightning bolt coming out of the heavens, energy from up there impacting the earth, which is, say, bringing something to this dimension, this realm, this terrestrial zone, something that it doesn't have yet that's coming from up there. So it's pouring new stuff in that you don't have yet. And that the noon as a suffix at the end of a word is to turn an action into a noun, or it's the description of one who does it. Like paint is a noun, and one who paints, but a painter is one who's engaged in the activity of using that paint. So that's what the noon at the end is. So you could say, this is what Yahweh is going to do to those who are keeping his covenant. Your enemies will flee before you. He's not necessarily going to knock them dead, but they will run from you. They will flee from before the face of Yahweh, and he will reside tranquilly with you. Those are two pretty great aspects of covenant. But if we invert our allegiance to his covenant, and we don't live up to our side of the obligation, and if we say there's no law, he is now no longer bound by that contract. Now you could say, well, in a covenant, even though one person blows it, the other person has to do it, that gets into a whole other definition. But the notion, Yahweh said, was that if we pervert, if we do not walk the straight path, if we disregard and profane his covenant, then this is what's going to happen to us. It's actually the opposite of those two things. Our enemies won't run away from us. As a matter of fact, they will run to us to pillage us, because they'll see that he is not in our camp and we're vulnerable, we're wide open. And if you read the entire Old Testament, in Hebrew known as the Tanakh, if you read the entire Tanakh from that frame of mind, you'll see that this message is repeated and validated again and again and again. That same message. So, going back to, okay, what's the basic message? We mentioned yesterday or last week about ABCs. We throw out the concept, ABCs, as like, oh, those are the basic givens. Well, what does ABC mean? And someone back here last week said, already been chewed. It's like, well, how does that fit? The covenant that was given to our forefathers, they chewed it and they spit it out, and we've been suffering ever since. That's the basic ABCs. What about ABCD? What is it about the D? So the purpose, hopefully, of this class that we're doing is that just like if you see this yield sign on the freeway and you go, oh, that's the Dalet. That's the heart of the matter. That is the thing that was brought. That's Yeshua claiming to be the door, but it's much more than that. I better yield to that in order to get the blessing. What does it mean to yield to that, and what is that? So hopefully, every time you'll think ABC or ABCD, or like last week you said ABCDEFG, and then there's a pause, that's Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, Zayin. Zayin is the letter which cuts off. It's like the moat around the castle, which is the chet, which is the fence. And so there's these pictures in the words, which if you have these pictures, then whenever you see the letter, you'll get the picture. And the picture is what spells the words. So in the Impressionist art movement in France in like the 1800s, 1700s, 1800s, I believe, there was a guy named Seurat, and he did a real famous painting. He did many of them, but one in particular is a pretty big mural, and it was a lot of little dots, like pixels. And it was a picture of some people standing by the edge of a lake in a park in the afternoon. And the way he captured the light and all was such that you stand back and you see a photograph of this picture, and it looks beautiful. It looks like a nice painting. It's kind of strange. But if you look close, it's just a bunch of dots. And you can't see the picture if you look real close. You just see dots. It's the same way computers and televisions are made these days, with just pixels, with dots. Words are spelled with the pixels of the letters. And sentences are written with the pixels of the words. And so what I'm trying to present to you is an illiterate mechanism of how to read Hebrew through this mechanism of deciphering the pixels used letter by letter, and then 2 letters by 2 letters, and thus spelling words and spelling concepts. So when Jamie read the alternative translation of what's in between the inverted noons, it says in quite a few words, who are the enemies of Yahweh? Those who have chosen to despise his ways. Those who have stirred up within their heart a basic antagonism, controversy, animosity, and hatred. And that same word, which is translated as simply enemy, literally you can read it as my grudge against you and your grudge against me. So people who look at Yahweh and say, well, I've got a grudge against him, and they might list out what that is. Well, all through the scriptures, he says what his grudge is against his people. And so it's not so much to think, well, enemies, those are those bad guys, those other guys, though, and then you fill in your favorite political party or religious orientation or the way that certain people behave or the color of their skin. Those aren't the enemies. The enemy is the people that harbor the grudge against Yahweh's ways. And so you could say, well, what are his ways? What are these ways, otherwise known, if you look all through the scriptures, as commandments, ordinances, statutes, judgments? So a couple years ago, I thought, well, there's all these big words. What exactly is the bottom line here? What's it all about? So you got these chok, that's the word for commandment. Well, and all this has to do with the Dalet. We'll get to that, and I want to show you how this is all actually describing what the Dalet is. To go up here on stage again, the letter het, this letter here, is literally the fence of the Mishkan. And then the letter kuf here, our letter Q, it has the round part and the vertical straight part, is kind of like a picture of the pillar of fire, pillar of smoke. It's also a picture of an exclamation point, which would be the center line, and a question mark, which is the big round part. The big round part is like billowing smoke, and a emphatic exclamation point, like a pillar of fire, like bang, right there. And so the dot at the bottom of a question mark and an exclamation point is actually what was under the pillar of fire, pillar of smoke, which was actually the Ark of the Covenant, and inside the Ark of the Covenant was the 10 commandments, or the 10 debarim, which is actually the word for matter or thing, that were written on the tables of stone with the finger of Elohim. So you could say, what's at the dot or the bullet point under the question mark and exclamation point is what's in the 10 commandments. We could say, okay, well, is the major issue then the 10 commandments, or is it what the 10 commandments express? So when you say the word chok, or commandment, it means het. It's spelled het kuf. But if you see, it's like, well, wait a minute. As a picture, not just the word chok, that's kind of hokey. You might say, it's like, who cares about that? The law's been done away with. But the chok is the pillar of fire and pillar of smoke over the Mishkan, which was the presence of the Shekinah, the neighboring, the dwelling of Yahweh with his people. When the pillar of fire, pillar of smoke was there, it's like Yahweh himself was Shin Bet, which is to sit or reside or to dwell. And the word Shabbat, which is spelled Shin Bet Tav, means that's the day where you go back and sit in the place that you dwell. Instead of going up and going to work and dealing with somebody else's concerns, you come home to your place where you reside with your neighborhood, you might say. I'm trying to show you that in the spelling of the words are the matters that the words concern themselves with. That's the heart of this whole study. That if you look at the spelling of the words and diagnose or decrypt what each letter means, and then also each pair of letters, which is where the dictionary comes in, you can see what the substance of each word is all about. Hence, looking at it from an illiterate perspective. You're looking at pictures. You're putting together pixels that if you look close and put the pixels together, then you step back and look at it and you can see the image. But if you're trying to read literately, you have to memorize the language, memorize the rules of grammar, memorize the phonetics. And so someone, for the record, has refined the more proper way to say the words that are in between the inverted nuns. And so they recorded it, and it's a nice little song. I'm not against that at all. I am simply looking at the spelling of the letters, struggling to sound them out phonetically, and you could say, well, it doesn't match the modern Hebrew writing. Well, the modern Hebrew writing with the vowel points apparently is a Masoretic scribe from the Middle Ages. They put these vowel points so that to lock in the proper way to read a word. The point is, what I found, and you can see this using the dictionary, is that there's sometimes a dozen, sometimes 3 or 4 different ways to pronounce the same word with the same few letters. And the question is, how do you know if the original writing had no vowel points written in the Paleo-Hebrew? How do you know the right way to pronounce that word? How do you know which word was intended? Now, if someone were to say, well, we know because it was handed down from father to son, from mouth to mouth, and so there's a certain way, and that's the way, and that's the prescribed, literate, technical, proper way to read this, and anybody who butchers it and pollutes it and scrambles up the phonetics has no business teaching this stuff. Those voices are out there. But what I have also heard was that really nobody knows how to actually express the original Paleo-Hebrew. They just don't know. But some authority has arisen that says, this is the way we pronounce it. Well, then we're not part of that we. This is just not trying to argue with that, but this is trying to go back to what Yahweh said, to do what he said, to regard what he said. If you look close, for example, under the festival listed in Leviticus 23, Pesach, which is upon us here, he says, you will proclaim the festivals in their seasons. Did he say, you better make sure to exactly do everything and offer the sacrifices exactly appropriate and make sure it's at the right day and the right hour and everything else? It's like, well, that's what you try to do. But he said, your obligation is to proclaim the festival. Now, if you stumble about trying to do it, and somebody's on this calendar and this evening and that evening, and this food, do you have lamb or do you not have lamb? Do you buy the lamb at the butcher, or do you butcher your own, or do you not have any lamb at all? It's like, it gets really confusing and really tangled, but he didn't say that we should beat each other up about that. He said proclaim the festivals in their seasons. And in our regard to observe them is simply for the regard of doing what he said to be pleasing to him and fulfill his desire for his people, and that as you regard these things, it changes your consciousness and it changes your heart. So the interesting thing about het kuf, the word chok, which is translated as commandment, which we're happy to be done away with as 21st century, and when I say Christian believers, I'm talking about 2,000 years of at least 2,000 different denominations, and you've got various Orthodox structures, you've got the Catholic structure, you've got all these Protestant structures. When I say Christian, I'm not trying to single out any group, I'm talking about a consciousness. And remember, the Christians historically have all been at each other's throats to kill each other with many wars across the globe. So when I say the word, I'm not invoking any one party line. I'm saying the general notion, Christianity at large, has perpetuated the notion that when when the Savior died on the cross, the law was done away with. And the word law can mean Torah, or it can be this word chok. And what I'm trying to show is that if you look back at the Hebrew concept, that the Mishkan fence, which is the light in the darkness, the white linen fence that separated out, like the concept of let there be light in the midst of darkness on day one, and like Pesach, which was Yahweh saying, I will be your Elohim, you will be my people, and this big white fence represents my kingdom compared to the darkness of being in the wilderness of slavery in Egypt, which was miserable. The word Mitzrayim sounds English word like miseries, which is why on the chart it says that word. They were miserable in Egypt in tyrannical servitude to despots who said, this is what you will do, this is what you will not do, and it's our lording over you. And Yahweh said, I will remove you from that house of bondage, that slavery, but I will be your master. And so Pesach represents the fact that we have yielded, Dalet, to him to say, you are my Elohim, and I serve no other. My allegiance to El Shaddai is that he provides. I do not yield my allegiance to my county, my state, my nation, or any other tradition. My allegiance is simply to Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh and his kingdom. So the Chet representing his kingdom and the Kuf representing the pillar of fire and pillar of smoke of his presence, which is the covering over his kingdom, doesn't that represent technically everything that Christianity claims to hold dear? To say, oh, well, that was done away with. It's like, well, then we got nothing. The notion then to say the Chok was not done away with is to say everything in the fence, not just the fence, but everything in the fence covered over the pillar of fire and pillar of smoke. And then you look at the inverted noons and say, what was in the fence? Everything is in that kingdom, and this is his presence. So, for example, I mentioned this once before, in England and London, when the Queen is present, then Buckingham Palace, they fly the flag. Essentially, when the Kuf is over the Ark of the Covenant, it's like the flag of Yahweh, his presence amidst his people. And so when he is there, it's the same picture as flying a flag over the residence. Interestingly enough, according to this pattern, the Zadi is in the 7th position, this letter right here, which is a sprout. It's kind of like a flag flying, which is the Shabbat, lines up with the Shabbat. So you could say, well, the Shabbat is a symbol, as he says, that we are his people and he is our Elohim. So we can go back and say, everything that's inside this Mishkan, everything between the Het and the Kuf, is him saying, when I am your Elohim, this is the stuff you get. This is the treasure box. And for us to say, I'm sure glad that law was done away with, it's like, I think we've been lied to that the law was done away with, that the Chok was done away with. But it wasn't a total lie, a complete lie, because Yahweh said, and this is the gimel, the boomerang concept, he says, if you disregard my stuff, your neighbors, the piratzim, the pirates, the ruthless destroyers that I have called get to come in and take your stuff that I had given to you until the day that you decide to come back and sit down at my table and come back to the stuff that's my stuff that I've given you, in which case I will take it back from the piratzim, the pirates, that I gave you the right to your stuff because you didn't want it. I will take it back from them, give it back to you, and then we can go on with the business as it should have been from the beginning. Well, so the question is, what is this stuff? So, interesting thing about the Dalet, and I'm trying to show you concepts about the way the letters work. Let me finish that thought. That the Het is a fence if we just think, oh, it's a fence. It's what keeps people out or it keeps people in. If you're in jail, it's what keeps you in. If it's a treasure box, it's the vault that keeps people out. So we're talking about Yahweh's treasure. So he's saying this isn't for everyone. This is for those who yield to the door that I have allowed to come in and get my stuff. And I've got numerous verses here that we can go over at some point where it talks about that's what's offered to Israel. And whether it's the land, the people known as the Jews, or the people known as the lost tribes, or the people that think they're this group or that group, Israel is simply those who choose. Yod is a prefix. Yod, Shin, Resh, Aleph, Lamed is the way you spell Israel. And again, to break apart the word, Yod means he will. Isar, Yod, Shin, Resh, means straight path. El, Aleph, Lamed, is power or strength. Shin, Resh can also mean prince. Resh, Aleph has to do with a visual aspect. Lamed has to do with teaching and learning, and a shepherd's staff of authority. So you could say, if you put all those together, plus Jeff Benner has this process where he broke down the word, and he basically compiles it down to he who turns the head of El. So you could say, well, if you were the mother of a baby, and you were in a nursery, and all of a sudden you heard this one voice, and so, oh, that's mine, and you regard that voice, because you can distinguish the voice of your own baby compared to anybody else's, and you go, oh, that's what Yahweh does with Israel. And there's verses that we can talk about which substantiate that. So the point is, Yahweh has offered to Israel his stuff. Well, what's his stuff? If it's contained within the Het Kuf, then everything within the Het Kuf is available to Israel if we yield to the door. You could say, okay, well, what's this door? What's this Dalet? In each letter, as we've said before and what's on the chart, is every other letter. The thing about the Hebrew language is that it's all contained in the alphabet. Nothing is outside the alphabet that we need to go look for to explain what Yahweh's stuff is. Rabbi Hirsch did some writings, and someone else, I forget the name of the author, but they compiled his writings and have an etymological dictionary. It's quite a bit smaller than this one by Ernest Klein, and it's a blue cover. And if you read the foreword, Rabbi Hirsch's comment was, Hebrew is so self-contained, you don't have to look at any other languages to find out what the Hebrew words mean. It's all by context of use. So a lot of the studies I've done is simply using the Torah and the dictionary. But this is an etymological dictionary where what Ernest Klein has done is studying many other languages is he looks at Akkadian and Arabic and Syrian and Aramean and modern and old, ancient, and he pulls it all together to invoke one other person's name, Isaac Moseson, who's in Teaneck, New Jersey. He's coined this phrase Edenics, like the study of the language from the Garden of Eden, Edenics. And he says, basically, all the languages came out of this one, which were scrambled and confused after the Tower of Babel incident. But if you roll them all back, they came out of this Edenic language, which linguists call the capital letter I and E stands for Indo-European root. He claims it's never been found, it's alluded to, it's pointed at, but it's a phantom. It's kind of like that silent aleph. They know it's there, they know it was the root source, but they've never found that actual language, but they know it's there. Well, what it is the Edenic language, which actually is Hebrew, which is actually the Paleo-Hebrew, though they can't say that because there's no scientific proof. So for me to stand here and tell you, oh, this is what it really means, this is me going out on a limb that a lot of people can want to chop off maybe and drop because it doesn't fit the linguistic pattern, but this is an illiterate mechanism. I keep trying to bring that out. So you realize, okay, this isn't standard science. This is this thing which is rather innovative, and hence it's a tool of blocks for you to play with and say like a little kid playing with blocks to learn the language. Just try to play around with it and see what you find. There's so much stuff. There's so much stuff to find. It's really amazing. So the point is you say, well, A, B, C, D, what is that? Well, if in every letter is every letter, and like Rabbi Hirsch was saying, then for Yahweh to reveal himself, Aleph means, again, identity and intention. And let me play off of one other thing. I mentioned at the beginning that I think maybe wasn't really brought out because it was went in passing rather fast, that I was going to help people lock into their minds what each letter means. Each week, I was going to try to wear some kind of a shirt or something that fits the letter according to the color and the pattern. So the first week, it was a white shirt, and it had this kind of a leather skin, I think you call it a jerkin type of a vesting. It's kind of a Renaissance era thing. Why that? Well, if you look at the chart, the aleph is white, because like white light contains all the other letters, if you break them out in a prism, all those other colors are simply the wavelengths contained within white. That's why aleph is white and why tav is white. All the other colors are in there. So the letter for animal skin in the dictionary is on page 8, and it's Adar, Aleph, Dalet, Resh. And what it means is to be wide, high, or glorious, which is where we get the word adore. It's also splendor, magnificent. It's also a garment or a mantle. Well, I was wearing an Adar, a leather skin, as a garment, as a mantle, as it were. It's also a kind of cedar or a kind of oak. So that's like cedar and oak or maple are these great trees, very strong, very tall, very beautiful. Maple turns colors. So there you get a picture of splendor and magnificence. It's also the skin of an animal. So I was wearing an Adar to show you that the Aleph is the Adar letter. It's also the month of Adar, which is the 12th month of the year. And Adarah is actually a threshing floor or a circular place for assemblies. Well, the word for threshold is also Dalet. So I'm showing you that all these letters are related, but there's this concept of that's where you begin. You begin at the Adar, the threshold. Mark has some great study that he did, which at some point we'd like to get him to contribute here, but about where everything was done at the threshing floor. That's where the judges met. That's where the value of the dollar, of the currency was established. That's where, you want to say a few things about that? Yeah, about your study. Just real quick, take a couple minutes to explain about the... Want to come up? Because rather than put words in your mouth, he just did this great thing, and I think people would appreciate it, because it has to do with the Aleph compared to the Dalet, or the Aleph of the Dalet, you might say. The yellow mic, here you go.
So I don't know
You're on the spot. I know I just pulled you out of the air. Here, but go ahead.
Well,
threshold concepts of
the
Dalet.
threshold concept, the first time the threshold is mentioned in Scripture is when the Levite priest goes after his concubine. You probably remember the story. And the men in the city, he lets her go, and the men in the city have their way with the woman. And he comes to leave in the morning, and she is discovered on the threshold with her hands on the threshold. And that's what kind of started the whole thing. And, Yahweh just says, check this out. Okay? So I started studying the threshold, and everything happens at the threshold. Not only death, life, covenant, not only in the past, but in the future. When Jephthah, he went and made the oath saying the next person that crosses that threshold, I'll sacrifice. You remember, he sacrificed his daughter. Remember that oath? Because he won the war. And even in, I ask people, hey, how about the threshold covenant? Everybody's heard about the threshold covenant, right? No, what's that? Well, you ever heard about carrying your bride over the threshold? Right? And so what does he do? He carries his bride over the threshold, and he goes and he consummates the marriage, right? He consummates, and then what happens is they have the issue of blood. Job says that the woman's womb is her door. And so when she as his virgin bride, they have sex, there's an issue of blood that goes across her threshold. Now Yeshua was born of a virgin, okay? So he came from the other side of the hymen. And so when he came through, blood was on the threshold also. But, there's all this stuff in the Old Testament about the threshold, right?
Pesach, the blood of the...
Pesach. Here we are in the season of Pesach, and it says to dip the hyssop into the basin and put it on the lintel and the post. Well, the Hebrew word for basin is also the Hebrew word for threshold. And it was the covenant back in those days. This was done way before Passover, is when you were going to make a covenant with someone, that person would come to the door and you would slaughter the lamb at the threshold. The threshold was the original altar before the temple. And then the altar switched from the threshold to the hearth, okay, to the table, okay. But in the future, you'll see that when in the temple, it says when in Revelation it says that when that living water flows out from the threshold of the temple, in Revelations again, when the angel with the inkhorn, he puts the name of Yahweh on the foreheads of the people, he's standing there at the doorway of the temple. When somebody comes and brings a sacrifice to Yahweh because he sinned, they sacrifice it at the gate. Gate, door, it's all the same. So, I mean, if you guys want to do a good study the threshold, study the gate. When Job, when anybody stood at the gate, when Lot stood at the gate, that's where contracts were made. That's where covenants were made. You know, so that's just a kind of a thumbnail sketch, but it goes a lot deeper than that. It's where life happens, death happens, covenants happen. It says in Ezekiel, I think it's 46, when the millennial kingdom's going on, he says that Yahweh's standing there at the post of the gate, and he allows when those gates are only open when it's the new moons and on Sabbath. But there's also a little thing in there. If somebody wants to come in and do a sacrifice, he says he stands there at the gate, at the post. So if he's standing at the post, he's standing on the threshold. You know? So.
Thank you. For meaning a gate or an entrance, I'll write one here, is chet, bet, bet. Technically, the word for bet is gateway or entrance. It's pronounced chababa, or chababi would be my, but if you think of this as the Mishkan, here's the gate, or the big white fence, and bet means in, it's also right like a house. So inside the big white fence there was the set apart place, and inside the set apart place was a veil where the Ark of the Covenant was. So you have the fence in, here's the fence, and inside that was this, and inside that. Again, it's zeroing in to the very heart of the matter. This is the 8th letter, so we pronounce that as an H, and this is pronounced as a B, and B, I believe it's where we come up with the phrase, hey baby. And it literally means my dearest, most cherished of the inner place of my heart is chababi. So the interesting thing is, as you play with English and Latin and Greek and other languages, like what Ernest Klein was saying, is that you look at this in a comprehensive etymological dictionary and say, well, it's invoking all these other twisted languages, or the languages which have morphed. But like what Isaac Moseson was saying, it's like, but it all goes back to Edenic. So if it started with the Edenic Hebrew language, after the Tower of Babel, they spun off, you should be able to see vestiges of the true language, even in the spun-off languages. So like Rabbi Hirsch was saying, you should stick with Hebrew. That's true to a sense, but I think it's also just as valid to look at these other languages like, hey, baby, and go back to finding the Hebrew. So that's why I keep using this etymological dictionary and finding it really valid. So going back then to these letters, with Aleph and the word Adar wearing that skin was a picture of that. The next week, Bet, a white shirt with blue lines. And it's like, well, Bet is the Aleph expressed in substance, and the blue lines are like the color blue. Bet is the blue letter up there, where Yahweh materialized his plan. And he said, wear a blue thread, a zitziot thread, to remember that I'm the guy who invented this place, determined the rules, the chok, delineated it, and told you to wear the blue thread, so I was wearing a white shirt with blue threads, which was like, remember, he's the guy who made this place and told us how it works. Last week, the Gimel, purple is, you might say, like royal decrees. And so the idea that the one who made this place then gave us his revelation, or sent his ambassador, or sent his diplomatic envoy from the heavens to the earth, earth being the Dalet place, the heavens being on the other side of the Bet, which is material creation, which would be the Aleph. So the Aleph making the material realm Bet the cosmos, and then gimmeling, as where we get the word camel, and gimel is the same word. Well, I wore a purple shirt, hence the royal envoy dispatched, wearing a camel hair jacket, because camel and gimel, it's the same word. It was a play on words. It was a picture of the royal gimel, the royal camel. Well, John the Baptist also wore camel's hair, just for that picture. And then hence this red, this is a smoking jacket. And you say, okay, well, it's not a bathrobe, Keith, but thank you for anyway. The point is, it's a smoking jacket. You say, okay, what does a smoking jacket have to do anything? It's nice silk, but here's the point. What is the word for Adam? If he gimmeled to the earth, what has that got to do with Adam? Well, the word for earth is either aretz, aleph resh zadi, or it's adamah, aleph dalet mem hey. The word aleph is a prefix, basically can mean I will, as we discussed the first week. It's intention or identity. So who will? I is the identity of the one who's going to do this. As in this word aretz, aleph is not a prefix, literately. But if you're reading it illiterately and you're just looking at pictures, aleph is the ox that you yoke up and you send him in motion, and he's going to this mark you put off in the distance, and he's going to plow the furrow. Well, the word mark is literally the word tav. Tav is a mark. The last letter in the alphabet, the white X, is the tav. If you yoke up an ox and put a mark, a tav in the distance, and get the aleph, the word aleph is ox, get the aleph moving, he goes to the tav. So pictographically, the alphabet going from aleph to tav is exactly when the farmer has a plan to get the aleph to go to the tav and pull this plow to make a furrow. That's what he's doing. It's so simple. It's right in the pictures that we haven't ever been able to see. If you read aleph resh zadi as a picture, let me show you where the dictionary comes in. This word resh zadi literally is the word for bishop in chess, the one that goes on a diagonal across the board, and it means a runner or a courier, like a sprinter. If you run the 440, there's your lap. You do the 440 yards. If you're a mailman, a courier, you're going to run this route. Every day, that's your route. So the word aleph resh comes from the French word for where we get the word area. So you could say, well, area is a tract of land. So one way to read the word aretz is, this is the tract of land where I will run my course. Aretz. Did the Almighty say, here's the place where I want to put my, we talked about last week, the word gimel has to do with stretching, a place to stretch your feet out is your footstool. So you make yourself a foot. The gimel in modern is a letter with a foot. So you make yourself a foot, you make yourself a garden planet, so you will have a place to put your foot as you go for a walk in the garden, on the path that you make for yourself. But also when he says, I'm going to now go to this place. I'm aleph, I'm going to materialize into the same cosmological substance which I have created for the cosmos, the universe, and I'm going to gimel, I'm going to voyage, go traveling, to where? Well, to the Dalet. As the Dalet. For what reason? For the Dalet reason. With what agenda? Well, that's also Dalet. So as I said last week with the word gimel, if you look close at all the words that have the gimel in it, the gimel is not only the letter with the foot, but like in Paleo, it's written like this. It's the head and the neck of a camel, right? And the camel's head raises up, he's going to get up and he's going to walk. So the picture of the gimel is the picture of the camel's neck. But it's also the shape of a boomerang because the camel goes back and forth, and the gimel concept of whatever you do is going to come back on you. If you regard Yahweh's words, the blessing between the noons, the inverted noons, is what you're going to get. And if you don't do it, the curse of not getting what's between the inverted noons is what you're going to get. And there's a bunch of other stuff about that too. But the point is, if you understand the gimmeling concept of what goes around comes around, there's a very particular word which has to do with this week that I was going to get to later. I'll mention it now. The letter ayin is an eyeball, modern letter shaped like that, and it has to do with the table of showbread drawn on the chart. Looks like eyes, with 6 loaves of bread on each of the 2 piles. The table of showbread. The word showbread is actually pronounced pan-im, and the word is pei-nun, yod-mem, the yod-mem being the plural ending of pei-nun, which is pan. While the word for face is panim. The word face is typically plural. But pei-nun, you might say, is a singular concept. Pei-nun yod is my face, pane. And so anytime Yahweh talks about what you have done in front of my face or before my face, it's also then what's in front of you is the word pane. But pe is a mouth, nun is a living thing which jumps out of, and yod is a hand that works that also means my. So what is your personal thing that jumps out of your mouth and causes something to happen like the lightning bolt from the sky to the earth, imparting an energy that wasn't there before? Sounds like words, right? So the reasoning of this is that pane, though it's translated as face or my face, it has the essential illiterate description of a word. That which proceeds from my mouth will not return to me void. It will accomplish whatsoever I have set it forth to do. That's what Yahweh says. That which proceeds from my mouth will not return to me void. That which proceeds from my mouth is what Yahweh spoke, which he set into motion. That's like the Aleph. There's the Aleph concept. That which proceeds from my mouth will not return to me void. It will accomplish. Well, there's the Tav. It will accomplish. There's Aleph Tav embedded in that which I spoke from my mouth will not return to me void. It will accomplish. Well, the concept of something gestating or incubating like one pregnant for a certain amount of time before it then happens, like a chicken and an egg. The egg is fertilized, then the chick inside the egg develops until the day it breaks out, is a mem concept, emet. Mem is water. It's also a ball like a womb, which is why that chart on fishing for soul is actually not just the concept of Aleph Tav, which is the beginning and the end, or the task that he initiated and then accomplishing it, which is the Aleph Tav concept, but the ball of water, the mem like a womb. The word Aleph Mem Tav is pronounced in English, emet, which is the word truth. So the word emet is the word truth, which is Aleph Mem Tav, which is the Aleph becoming Tav. Mem is this period of time like a tsunami. There's an earthquake, that's an initial event, and then this thing is growing and developing, the shock wave and the water moving and displacing until there's a tidal wave, which is why Mem looks like a tidal wave. It's translated as chaos, if you look at Frank Seekins and Jeff Benner's, because it's a chaotic event. So when you translate the letter Mem as simply chaos, you've missed this other thing. But when you give birth, that's chaotic. And it's this chaotic process. You might say, well, what's so chaotic? Well, for Aleph to become Tav, it has to go through Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, Zayin, so forth and so on, all the way until it becomes Tav. That is the prescribed path for Aleph to become Tav according to the Hebrew alphabet. And if this is the word that Yahweh established from the beginning, then these letters are his face, his pane, revealed as this word. Well, in the Gospel of St. John 1:1, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word became flesh. The Word was with Elohim, and the Word was Elohim. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. It's like, how can it be with him and yet be him and yet became flesh? So right there is a huge distinction between what is called Christianity, what is called Judaism, and what might be called something else where they say we're not going to believe in all these multiple deities. There's a mystery there that most people can't explain. Let me show you how it's explained according to this. We talked about this previously. The Ein Sof means without limit. Okay, how do you define the one without limit? You can't. Soon as you say what he is, you've established a limit, which means you haven't defined him. You've said what he's not. So you can't say what he is without saying what he's not, because what he's not is don't say anything. You've just defined the one without a limit, right? It's counterintuitive. It's an oxymoron. You can't do it, right? It's a setup as this riddle which is unbreakable. He himself, though, gave us these limits by which he determined we should apprehend or comprehend or engage him. What are those limits? They're not unlimited, they're limited. But he gave us these limits which collectively are his personal reference. And they happen to be these 22 letters. As a matter of fact, when you look back at in Exodus, I think it's Exodus chapter 4, he said very specifically, he said, when you heard me speak to you and give you my ways, my hokim, my stuff, my commandments, you did not see an image. You did not see a male or female, nor did you see any creature of the heavens or under the earth or any creeping thing. No image. You heard a voice. Look back and read it. Now, if we get out of a Christological, Greco-Roman, English-American 21st century mindset and try to go back to what he actually said, we will read the scriptures differently. He gave us no image. What he gave us was words. Why did he choose words? He also says in the New Testament, in another place, he said he chose the foolishness of preaching to be the vehicle by which his seed, his word, would be transferred from generation to generation. The word for generation is dor, Dalet Resh. You can also look up in the Red Dictionary under Dalet Vav Resh. And the word dor lador is Dalet Resh Lamed Dalet Resh. So it's Dalet Resh Lamed Dalet Resh. Dor lador, which is generation to generation. I don't know if we'll have time to get into that, but you can pick that apart and see what he's saying by picking apart the letters. Okay, so the point is, the word eretz is, I will come to this area. If you look at these words, you'll see what he's trying to do. And if he is actually describing his face that we should regard in these letters, then if you want to see him, you don't look at an image, you look at his words. And then you look at this word for Adam. Well, the word earth can be Adamah, but the word Adam is Aleph Dalet Mem. Again, Aleph as a prefix can be I will, or this is who I'm going to be, or this is what I'm going to do, or I have decided, I've determined to do this. Dalet Mem, you look it up in the Red Dictionary, and it is the word blood. Hence the red of what we're wearing. Red Dalet. Blood. So if you look at the, it's a whole other story we'll get to another week, but the emblem back there with the symbol of the Aleph Mem Tav underneath, which is the truth concerning the beginning and the end of the agenda of the earth, and the image up in there, there's a Vav, which is red. So you have Yod He Vav He, and to go on the four colors of the embroidery, the blue of the Yod is the blue of the Creator. I made this place. Bet. Hence the blue letter here, which is why also the letter Yod here in the middle is blue. The Creator, He, revealed his royal decrees, which is the Torah, which is purple. Like the Gimel was purple, the letter He, which actually lines up with, not that letter He, but the Kaf and Lamed. These are layers deep, so that's why the He is a different color than the Kaf and Lamed. But nevertheless, Kaf and Lamed line up the Torah. This lines up with Yod, He, Vav, He. Blue, purple, red, white. Blue, purple, red with white linen is the embroidery on the priest garments and on the door. I know this is sounding far scattered, but we talked about this before. I'm not trying to spend a lot of time with this, but going back to say blue, purple, red, the Vav is red. Why? Because the word Adam literally means red earth, red blood. Adam, I will bleed. For him to name Adam, was he saying, I will bleed? For him to take the form of Adam, which is the son of man, because the word son doesn't necessarily mean son as we think of it. We talked to this on the week of the Bet. The word Bet Nun is the word son, but where we get the word bone is Bet Vav Nun or Bet Nun He, Bana, which has to do with building and construction. It's taking on the form. Again, the word for pattern is Tav, Bet, Nun, Yod, Tav, Tabanit. By the way, for the record, on the chart, that word is misspelled. It's in the middle in the right-hand column. The Yod and the Tav are transposed. It should be Tav, Bet, Nun, Yod, Tav. Wrapped up in the two Tavs is Bet, Nun, Yod, which is the word my son. So the word for pattern, as in the pattern of the Mishkan, is my son wrapped up in the covenant. The interesting thing about the word Tehillet, which is the color blue, is spelled Tav, Kaf, Lamed, Tav, which is everything wrapped up in the covenant. Kaf Lamed is the word Kal, which is all. So everything's wrapped up in the covenant is the color blue, which is the color Tehillet, and there's a song someone did, the color of your people Israel. It's the color of the blue thread. I'm jumping around to tie these in like we did with the Aleph week. We're showing you like the banyan tree where everything's connected. So I'm trying to give you these concepts. I will bleed. But the word Aleph Dalet also is vapor or mist. Vapor or mist. So to play off on the imagery, this is a smoking jacket, like the vapor or mist of blood. Adam is basically a vapor of blood. He came sent as the diplomatic envoy, the voyager, the ambassador, taking upon himself the vapor of blood, knowing that coming here, he will bleed. That's ABCD. The other thing about Dalet, we've only got about a minute here left before the break. In India, they have castes. The Dal are the lowest caste, the very, very, very bottom that everybody scorns. The word Dal, or Dalal, if you look in the Red Dictionary, it means to be impoverished, to droop, to hang down, like someone who's so poor that they just can't even stand up, that's so burdened, that's so diminished. He turned his back on the dignity of being the heavenly prince, the heavenly one, the one who himself is the wealth of the universe, the wealth of the kingdom of heaven. It was all his, and yet he turned his back on that, the sent one, to diminish himself, taking upon himself the form, the Bet Nun, the bone, the structure of Adam, son of man, which we don't get in English, so you have to look at it more, Ban Adam, to deplete himself and become vulnerable, like taking your hand and putting it into a snake pit so it can get bit when you didn't have to. You could have stayed aloof and back here. To deplete your advantage, to be diminished, to make yourself vulnerable, and to hang down like dropping a bucket into a well, literally, in Hebrew is Dalet Lamed Lamed, Dalal. He became the Dalal, to reach down into our world to get bit by us vipers.